It's time to rethink, renew, and reimagine retirement. Welcome to Retire Repurposed. This podcast is dedicated to help people transition into fulfilling and purposeful retirements. Retirement is a big life change. In fact, the two most dangerous years of a person's life are the year they were born and the year they retire. We believe that retirement is not the end, rather the beginning of what could be the most impactful season of a person's life. So don't retire, become repurposed. Well, I'm your host, Jared Sebesta. I'm the co-founder of Retire Repurposed alongside Ben Tejas. Thank you so much for joining us today. Whether you found us online, listening to us on the radio, regardless, head over to iTunes, find our podcast, click subscribe, and better yet, leave us a quick positive rating and review. If you would just take a moment and do that, we would appreciate that so much. Now, this podcast is all about retirement, but it's not about money. It's about the non-financial parts of retirement, which many times can be even more challenging than the financial. Few people can just flip the switch from working a career 30, 40 plus years, shutting it off on Retirement Friday without methodical and intentional steps to living what we call a repurposed retirement. If you want more for your life and your retirement, then you have come to the right place. Well, on this episode, we continue our series on retirement habits. Healthy habits are important at any time in your life, but especially in retirement. Time is one of your greatest assets if you are a retiree, but if you have bad habits, that time is going to work against you. Today, we cover the habit of setting long-term schedules. Even as a retiree, your weekly and your yearly rhythms should mimic God's design. In this podcast, Ben will tell you what events need to be on the schedule of a retiree every single week, every quarter, and every year. Enjoy this episode. All right, folks, welcome back to the show. We are continuing our series on retirement habits, and we are going to kind of piggyback off of the last episode we had talking about schedule. We're going to talk more of long-term schedules today, so we have a fabulous episode in store for you today. Thank you again for joining us. Just a quick reminder, we got a brand new Facebook group called Becoming Repurposed in Retirement. Join a growing community of people that refuse to accept the typical American dream retirement. We've got more tips on living repurposed, special content, Facebook Lives, Q&A sessions. Go to facebook.com and search Becoming Repurposed in Retirement to join a growing community of people ready to make their retirement everything it was supposed to be. By the way, if you're following along with us every week, if you go to the Facebook group right now, I've got a special article on there on the animal personality types. We did an entire series on this last year, but if you go there right now, as of the recording of this podcast, you can go there and right at the top of the page, you're going to see links where you can get all the research, all the tests to really kind of understand who you are. And this is a great time to do it here as we're kicking off a brand new year. So make sure to go to facebook.com and join that group. Ben Tejas joins me on the show here today. And again, we're continuing this series on retirement habits. And this is now, I think, probably fifth or sixth episode we've done this. But this is just a really important topic that we cover. Habits. We find our identity in habits. We find our rhythms, our routines out of habits. Retirement is it can be a really great time to develop good habits, and it can be a really bad time to develop really bad habits.
Yeah, and I've been listening to a lot of stuff on James Clear lately. And I think we even had a podcast a while back on that. And he wrote a book, Atomic Habits, which has been very big for me. And one of the things I always take away from that book was he mentioned that our habits become like the compound interest of self-improvement. Mm-hmm. And he talks about that our habits really, it's not that we're doing things, it's that we're becoming somebody. He does talk a lot about identity, like you said. Our identity is formed many times for people, like who we are, is based on what we're doing over and over and over. So those small daily habits are a big deal.
Yeah, again, the compound interest of who we are today is really an overall average of the way that we've been acting, the things that we're doing, the things that we're choosing to do and not to do over the last 3 to 5 years. So if you don't like where you are right now, again, it's a good time to maybe look in the mirror and say, what are some things I'm doing or not doing that has gotten me to this point, and start to shift it. Things are kind of working against you, in retirement. You've got your body just kind of naturally getting older. That's just the part of being a human being. So again, it's a great time to do it. You've now got the time, you've got the bandwidth. What a great time to actually kind of really engage with some of these things.
Yeah, and you just said, yes, we're getting older, But again, as I've said numerous times on this show, it is less to do with just how much older you're getting in your physical body and more to do with the fact that you have just stopped working.
Right.
I want to make sure people hear that over and over, is that act of retirement has way more to do with you aging than actually you getting 1 year older. So remember that. And we can come, really go against that and kind of counter those effects by doing the things that we're talking about. A show a few weeks ago, we did the one on daily schedules, daily things that you should have in every single day. Now we're going to move on and go a little bit longer term. So as long as you're taking those habits and you're moving them from your daily habits to your weekly, to your monthly, quarterly, and annual, I think that's your best way to stay relevant. And that's really what we need more of, is retirees that are looking at different, that are retiring differently than just being retired and just being done.
We started this mini-series with having the heart of gratitude. We talked about positive self-talk, reflecting, the importance of movement. As you mentioned last week, Ben, we started talking about schedule and setting a daily schedule. To piggyback off that, we've taken a bit of a break here because we've had Christmas, the brand new year. But last week on the show, again, if you're following along in order with us, we had Michael Francis, ex-mob boss, on the show. And we had a really great conversation. And again, I encourage everybody to go back and listen to all these shows. But if you missed that one, there's a great example of a gentleman who, he's 71 years old, has a phenomenal story. And we could have spent 4 podcasts just talking about his story. We didn't. I'd asked him more really about his life, like what, because he doesn't look 71 and he doesn't act 71. All due respect to people in that age bracket. And again, if you listen to that show, the main takeaway you're going to get is that you can't accept that you're old. As soon as you start doing that, your body will follow, and you'll start the slow down method. And I mean, he's as busy as he's been in a while, but he's also having the greatest impact, but also having the most fun at the same time. So that was a show last week that we can kind of go back to and think about.
Yeah, and I heard from him, on that show, the same thing. He did talk a lot about the physical, like how physical important it was for him to stay physically active. And I think retirees can hear that and see that, certainly. But I think him staying so relevant in creating and doing things with his mind, so important too. I mean, he's starting some new business ventures, wrote a book. I mean, there's so many things there that he's staying and really repurposing his life's experiences into something much greater.
Yeah, he said, if you don't feel well, you don't think well. And if you don't think well, you're just not going to act well. And I mean, that kind of seems obvious, but I think there's a lot of truth in that. So go back, listen to the shows, check out Michael Francis. That was last week. So much good stuff out there. So we're going to talk more about setting a long-term schedule, but last week we really dissected the daily schedule. It was really interesting to really think about what are some things that a retiree needs to kind of have baked into their schedule each and every day. I think there's a rhythm that people need to get into, and let's cover that quickly before we get into today's show.
Well, yeah, Jerry, I think the rhythm thing's a big deal. I think people are conditioned while working to get in a certain rhythm. Like you get up, you do certain things in your morning routine, you go to work, you do these things. So we are people that over time get in certain rhythms. And when all that changes and all of a sudden you're in retirement and you let your day just become one day flows to the next and you kind of forget these certain things, I think people get in a lot of trouble. So we talked a lot about that. There needs to be activity, number one. Every single day we need to have activity. Needs to be some fun, social time. I love this, adding value every single day. That should be our goal. We should go about our lives, whether retired or not, to say, I'm going to make a difference in somebody's life. Just so happens I see that's a little bit easier for people to do that while working because we're with teams, we're creating goods, whatever that is, but adding value. And there needs to be rest, right? We got to have rest. And I think it's so important that people continue to keep these things in their day, continue to have gratitude, have reflection. I mean, these are all things that need to be engineered into someone's day. And if they're not careful, every day looks like a Saturday, and that's what we don't want.
Yeah, I can imagine getting to the end of the day and just kind of thinking it was just another day. And that, again, we talk about this a lot on the show, and I think it's just because it can be so easy to slip into. If I don't have a schedule kind of leading and guiding my day, I know me as an otter, by the way, can get really distracted, and you just kind of get off course. And I love the idea of ending the day and feeling like I was productive. So again, little plug for last week's show. We dissect what every 24-hour period should look like, when you should start planning the next day, and the importance of planning each day out so you have a great daily schedule. So today, again, we're going to talk more of setting the long-term schedule. And Ben, we've kind of broken this down into 3 time frames, and these will obviously make sense. We talked about the daily schedule last week. So now we're going to talk about the weekly, the quarterly, and the yearly schedule. Let's start with the weekly schedule. How should this kind of stack up? What's the template? What's the kind of the rhythm that a weekly schedule should look like for a retiree?
Well, I think first of all, recognizing that God actually designed this. He designed it to be a system where there were 6 days of creation and 1 day of rest. So I think if you can start basing, and you did that while working too. Mm-hmm. So whether or not you're a person of faith or not, or even if you don't like Christians, you're like, oh, I don't like the faith aspect because you've been burned by enough of them, which can happen. I think you have to look at and you can acknowledge that there are things built into modern society that have come from Christianity, come from the Bible, and one of them will be this 6 days of work and 1 day off. So I think if you just start there on a weekly schedule, remembering work gave us those guardrails of nowadays 5 days on and maybe a Saturday and a Sunday, but definitely some rest in each week.
What's interesting is that if you look at it in that context, it's the same template that we have for each day. We've got some work, we've got some play, we've got some adding value, we've got some movement, we're moving our body, and then we've got a little bit of rest. It's basically the same template, just drawn out over the course of 7 days. And again, I think that it's just such a phenomenal point that this is all laid out in Genesis 1 and 2 already. And God starts with that and gives you kind of the template. But I think the argument would be from, typical American dream retirement is that, well, I don't want to work for 6 days. I want to rest for 7 days, not just one. So how do people get over that hump with these eyes of kind of how retirement is sold to societies nowadays?
Well, first of all, realize that when we're saying work or adding value, that doesn't mean that you're at the daily grind of what your workday was. Mm-hmm. If you were a person who didn't enjoy your work, and there were too many pieces of your normal work from your career that bothered you, look at the stuff that was good. Continue to do that. Mm-hmm. I just had another great meeting just today where I was visiting with one of our friends of the firm, and as we talked, he made it pretty clear. He's like, "Guess what? I'm working yet," and he was working. And he said to me, it changes when you don't have to work for income.
Right.
And it does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because he said it's just more enjoyable because he's able to do the things that he wants to do, mm-hmm. and get rid of the things he doesn't. So when we say, 5 or 6 days of work and then a day off, we're not necessarily saying you can never retire. What we're saying is you've got to find things in your life that are adding value to other people. That should never change, regardless of if you're working mm-hmm. or if you're retired.
I think it needs to be said that there's a difference between hobbies and work, and we want people to have both. I think if you listen to us and take us out of contents, we'll say, you shouldn't. Hobbies are a waste of time. Having a nice yard, that's a waste of time. That's busy work. You shouldn't do it, and it's wrong. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is hobbies are great. You want to go have some time out in the shop. You want to kind of poke around in the yard. And I do that stuff, and I really enjoy it. But there's also a balance, too, of adding value. Again, I do that through work and job. Through retirement, though, you're going to have to get maybe a smidge more creative, but there still needs to be a balance. It's not one or the other. It's both and, isn't it?
Yeah, and if I hear a lot of people say, hey, I want every day to look like Saturday. When I'm retired, every day is Saturday. It just kind of all blends together. It's a bunch of Saturdays.
Right.
I hate that. I feel like, man, you're missing something there. Unless your Saturdays have always been, engineered in a way like you get up, you get moving, you go, potentially do some work, you attain a goal, mm-hmm. you accomplish something, you use your body, you use your mind, you do some rest, you do the things that we talk about, then that's fine.
Right.
But I still don't think they should each just blend into one another. Mm-hmm. I think there still should be a difference where we look at our weeks and we engineer them so that they contain these things that we've mm-hmm. been talking about.
Right.
I think we should engineer each week to certainly have all the stuff we've talked about in our daily routine, but I think there needs to be even a little more than that, Jared. I think if I'm a retiree today, and whether even if I'm not retiring, I should try to focus on, and if my wife's listening, forgive me, honey, but there should be, if you're married, a date night. There should be a time where you're setting it aside with your spouse. There should be a time where you're like doing some social gathering of some kind.
Right.
Like you're making sure that you're being in communion and because we're created to be social, to be with other people. There's so many of those things that you have to have in each week that are beneficial in the day, but I think you can look at them. Once a week is enough for some of those.
Yeah. Well, again, this mimics your daily things, because if you go back and listen to last week's show, or at least the last episode on setting a daily schedule, a lot of these things are in there. They're just a little bit more, they're templated out over the course of the week. And you're probably not going to go on a date with your spouse every day, but I think once a week, spending time with your spouse, going for a walk, is a daily thing, but maybe going out for dinner is once a week. You kind of see how this works. But I do agree with you. I think that the template of the day should mimic the template of the week. And just kind of one more point here on the working 6 days and resting a seventh. I think if your goal in retirement is to make every day look like Saturday, I think you're kind of getting away from God's design. You know what I mean? I think that you're kind of going against the grain, and that certainly doesn't mean that God loves you any less. It's just there's blessing when you operate within the confines and the constructs that He made and gave us to operate our weeks. But again, you say that with a huge caveat. You know, there should be a day as a retiree where you unplug, where your day is purely rest. But that means the other 6 days, you're adding value. You know what I'm saying? So again, there's this give and this take. There's this ebb and this flow and this circadian rhythm with each week. So not to beat a dead horse here, but I think that this weekly pattern is so important to a retiree, because again, you can kind of be off a day or here or there, but if your weeks start getting off and they all kind of start blending in, man, time's going to go fast. And you're gonna feel just not the way you're supposed to, because it's not how God created you to live.
Yeah, and at some point in your life, you will look back and say, "I think I could have done more." One of the worst things we see with retirees is regret. People do not regret what they did. They regret what they did not do.
Right.
So again, as you're looking at you engineering your days, your weeks, your months, your years, be making sure that you don't end up someday thinking about, I should have taken that time more seriously. I should have put more into those days than just let all those days get away from me.
So we talked about the daily schedule last week. We've touched on the weekly schedule here already. Let's talk about the quarterly schedule. What does that look like, or what should people think about when kind of setting a quarterly schedule?
Well, I would think about, these are things that, potentially larger things that I just can't, that I need to do more than once a year. So an example of that is, I think people need to always have some anticipation in their life. I love it when we're looking forward to some trip. And once a year is just too long for many people. It's
too long to wait.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I know I can look forward to, like for my example, I just got done with a 4-day ice fishing trip with some good friends of mine. And we had such a great time. That happened to be a once a year trip. I'm going to see if we can get together a little more than that. Maybe we'll make it quarterly. But I think having that anticipation was important over the last several weeks. I think in months. I think it gave me something to look forward to. I think another thing that I always want to see in a quarterly schedule would be a time of making some commitments, right? To make myself incrementally better. We just came into a new year here. Well, a lot of people like say New Year's resolutions. You hear about that. I would be less a proponent of that and say by part way, we do it in our business, right? Quarterly goals, quarterly rocks. If you set these goals and make a commitment to achieve those goals over the course of 4 different times throughout the year, I think it makes it more measurable and attainable.
I think it's more palatable, and it's easier to digest. I'm just thinking of my kids here as you're talking. You went ice fishing, but I'm thinking about going to a water park or maybe a 4-day getaway this winter or something like that. It can still be 2 months away, but to a kid, they can handle that. Now, if we said, hey, we're going to take this trip or go visit this fun place, and it's coming up October of 2025, they can't. I mean, you can't get excited about that, So I think that there's this balance of like, if it's not on the schedule, it doesn't happen, but it's not so far away that it's just kind of out of sight, out of mind. Quarterly is a great time frame for that.
Yeah, great time, like you said, for setting those anticipatory things that we're looking forward to.
Yeah.
But also a short enough time period when
Right.
we're setting goals and making commitments that we can get things accomplished.
Yeah.
Many times we, especially in our business, we look forward, let's go forward a month or two. Those are nice short chunks of time, or
Yeah.
3 months, where you can say, I want to get this and that done within this amount of time. Not just, okay, by the year 2024, we'll
Right.
have these things accomplished.
Right.
If you miss a few, it gets compounded, and you're like, well, why even try, right? So I believe in setting, in this quarterly goal setting. I'm doing quarterly goals, but I'm also having quarterly things I'm looking forward
Yeah,
to.
and also too, having some reflection time and looking back at last quarter, do some evaluating. That's why we do set yearly goals in our business, but lots of times our mind, in a year, lots gonna happen. We're gonna know more, and sometimes if you commit to this goal that you set a year out, you got to be able to kind of like ebb and flow, and throw an audible in life. Life changes, and again, setting weekly goals might be a little much if they're big type of personal goals, but yearly is probably too long. So I like this idea of setting kind of these quarterly guidelines and giving yourself some time to reflect on those as well. All right, we got a couple of minutes left. Let's talk about the yearly stuff. All right, so this is kind of more of the, I would say, bigger picture, but what does that look like to a retiree?
Well, retirees, I talk about this all the time with our clients, is like, how much are you traveling? And they typically can come up with one big thing they're trying to do a year. It's really common. It's like, hey, I'm taking, and you know what always comes up, Jared? I'm taking a big trip with my family. And I think if we can engineer an annual trip with more than just you and your spouse, but bring kids, if you can begin to have an annual trip where you do something really significant. This doesn't have to be, don't hear it's high dollar. There's people listening to this that aren't going to spend $20,000 or $30,000 to take everybody to Hawaii with them for a week. That's probably unattainable for many. But if you can just say, we're going to have that week of vacation time all as a family together. And you can get in the rhythm of doing that early, and you pay for it, by the way. If you're retired hearing this and you're capable of doing that, and you want to invite a bunch of kids with you and your family and grandkids, and you're able to do that, say, you know what, this is all on us. If you guys want to just cover small parts of it, great. But I think that makes it a true invite where you say, come on with us. We want to do this together as a family. And you do that once a year.
I think that the horsepower that you get out of a trip like that is huge. I'm thinking about, my parents and my in-laws and the amount of grandkids that they have. If they spend, $100 on each kid, at Christmas time, that adds up pretty quickly when you have, 10, 15 grandkids, And I'm certainly not suggesting you don't give them some presents, but what if you took that money and said, we're going to rent out an Airbnb or something like that? And, coming up this summer, we're all going to get together as a family. Let's block off 3 or 4 days and get together. And, you can rent out a pretty nice lake cabin for $1,000 over the course of a weekend and have some fun. Certainly not to say that other experiences aren't just as powerful, but if you want to connect with your grandkids, that's the way to do it. If you want to connect with your kids and give them value, as to me, Ben, we're kind of the same age. We got kids. My parents said, hey, we want to, treat you out to a fun weekend, a 4-day weekend at the lake, and we pay for it. I'm probably going to take you up on that offer. You know what I mean? And that's connection. That's what you're looking for. So look at these yearly things as a high horsepower opportunity to really connect with your family and your grandkids.
Yeah, and you look at all these things, Jared, and whether or not we're looking at our weeks, even our days, our months, these quarterly goals and quarterly things to look forward to, or even these annual things. What we're after, right, is that you're not just trying to check off a box. Don't hear us and say, well, they said I got to have a little gratitude, check the box. Oh, they said I got to add a little value, check a box. What we're after is making people look different. I want retirees that hear our message, that meet with us, to not look like every other retiree. And I'm putting that in quotes, every other retiree. I want you to look different. I want you to have things in your life that people say, I want what you've got.
Well, I sure hope you enjoyed this conversation on the habit of setting long-term schedules. Again, I love how our schedules should mimic God's design. There's a rhythm and a structure that He used in creation, and when we utilize that framework in our own lives, there's blessing. Thank you so much for listening today. For more information on Repurpose, go to our website, retirerepurposed.com. Until next time, I'm Jared Sebesta. Remember, don't retire, become repurposed. We'll see you then.
Securities offered through Avantax Investment Services. Member FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through Avantax Advisory Services. Insurance services offered through an Avantax affiliated insurance agency.